what's up everybody? Welcome back. Infamous here, talking a little bit about the dragonKnight changes. If you've had the opportunity to check out on some of the previous changes regarding the dragonKnight, some of the changes are here for the Scalebreaker patch. There was an increase here to Searing Strike, which is the base of things like embers, which is what DK uses for healing. That got a slight buff, as you can see right here. Searing Strike increased the damage over time by approximately 26% on this particular build, which is designed for no CP. It's got just about an 18,000 unbuffed heal, and this is unbuffed with I think like 2600 base spell damage. This will probably go up to about 20,000 or so in no CP. Which is ridiculous amounts of damage, but that's neither here nor there. What I really wanted to talk about, outside of, I know people were like, Combustion got a buff. The buff to Combustion is irrelevant. The reason being is because they increased the cost of Shattering Rocks by 1,000, right? So in essence, Combustion gained an extra 3 ticks, right? So you gained an extra 1,500 magicka, the equivalent of 1,500 magicka. Again, Combustion is a situational proc. It procs when you put the burning status on people, which is why in my previous video, as I said, when I run my MagDK and light armor, where I'm running burning spellweave on the back bar, I had explicitly said to make sure you run charged. The reason being is because you want that to proc the burning passive, either from engulfing that I run on the back bar or from talons that I run on the back bar, to increase the uptime from this passive. So why do I say that it's irrelevant? Like I said before, is because typically, I should say, if you are running fossilize, right, either morph has been increased by 1,000 magicka and it's on a 7-second cooldown, any decent player, you're going to CC them on cooldown, which means you in essence have lost all the extra ticks, because over the course of a long duration fight, and I'm just talking in a 1v1, not in a situation where you're in a 1vx. In a 1vx situation, it is a magical loss even with the buff. Even with the buff to Combustion, because over time, if you're fighting multiple opponents and you're having to fossilize multiple opponents at once, to either provide pressure relief to your teammates, or you're just providing pressure relief to yourself, this is it's still a loss, because it's 2,000 magicka. If you're in a 1vx and a 1v2, it's an extra 2,000 magicka. The Combustion passive does not proc per person. It only procs every time that you proc the Combustion. Every time you proc burning status effect, it'll only proc on that person. It just runs a specific cooldown. Each effect can occur once every 2 seconds. So you're only going to get the 500 every 2 seconds, regardless of whether you proc the burning status effect on 5 people or if you're only proc it on 1. You still only get the equivalent of the 500 every 2 seconds. It only applies it will only apply to you every 2 seconds. So even in a 1v1, the extra magicka that you're getting, it's still a loss because of the change to the increased cost for Petrify, and of course that is affected by both morphs. If you're running, and I said this a long time ago, if you're playing MagDK, you should have transitioned a long time ago to Shattering Rocks. Fossilize was for stamdk.build, not for MagDK. The reason being, especially if you were running talons, you did not want to run fossilize, because fossilize would just everybody would just dodge roll fossilize and they'd gain the immunity, and then you couldn't immediately talons the person. You'd have to wait. Whereas you could Shattering Rocks, you could apply Shattering Rocks to the person, double whip, they'd CC break, and then you could immediately fossilize them. And then you could immediately talons the person a second later, or as they were CC breaking. Of course, that worked out much better than just giving somebody the immunity. Because of the changes, of course, to medium armor change via the evasion skill, it's going to be a lot harder for Magicka DKs to stay within range of medium armor players, because now they have an increased duration on being immune to both slows as well as root effects. This primarily affects things like melee magic and Nightblade, and of course Magicka DK primarily because most Magicka DKs don't utilize chains. This particular build I do, but most Magicka DKs don't utilize chains, so they don't have access to a gap closer. So typically the way that they stay within range of their opponents is via the warmth passive, which applies every time you deal direct damage. It applies a 3-second slow to your opponent. If you're fighting a medium armor build, this passive is basically useless against them because of the increased duration of the immunity to both roots as well as slows. I disagree with this change, primarily because it affects Magicka DK very strongly, as well as melee Magicka Nightblades who are utilizing Cripple to be able to stay within target range, because either morph, because Cripple will give you the root, or you utilize the other morph that gives you the 50% slow. If you're fighting against mobile medium armor builds, it becomes almost impossible to stay within range of them unless you're running a gap closer, which I typically don't like utilizing the gap closer on melee Magicka Nightblade because it's a damage over time, and ideally I want more burst, which is why even though Impale is shit, I still run it. With that said, talking about the difference between, is a really good example. People are like, embers heal for 78% of the damage. The damage that it heals is, of course, the heal is based off of the damage, right? You look at something like the Mage's Guild ability here, Structured Entropy. Structured Entropy, in essence, does almost the exact amount of healing that Embers does, except it does it from range, and it does not require you to be dealing damage over time. It gives you a hot. In essence, this ability is now better than Burning Embers. The reason being is because the heal over time, as you see there, it says it does damage over time. You can see the ridiculous tooltip, and this is unbuffed. 21,000 over the course of 12 seconds. So unbuffed, it's, what is it, 21,000 divided by, what is it, 12. So it gives you around 1750 per second. Ticks every 2 seconds. So it's a 3,500 damage over time. But the heal is not dependent upon that ability, upon the amount of damage that's done. The heal ticks 6 times over the course of the duration of the skill. And it's, as you can see here, it's got an 1161 tooltip. So in PvP, it would be roughly around 600. That's before heavy armor, before major mending, and of course before the minor vitality, etc. Before heavy armor, like I said, before any of the buffs, before the extra 12% that you get from running volatile armor. So in essence, Structured Entropy does a better job and better damage than a DK dot ability that's designed around melee play. But this ability can be applied from 28 meters. That's the logic behind the whole, is this a dot, sort of standardization? Is this a dot? Well, it's going to deal this amount of damage, it's going to cost this amount, etc. Right? Same thing with the AoEs. Is it an AoE direct damage ability, or is it an AoE dot ability? It's going to cost this much, it's going to do this amount of damage, etc. That's the problem with that whole mindset, is that this is exactly what it does. A class that is designed around melee dot and trying to whittle your opponent down gets outclassed by a secondary skill line dot that can be applied from range. The reason that I say that this is an actually better heal is because you have to double swipe to get embers. If the person cloaks, they streak away, or if they're just faster than you, because now they're with the new medium armor, they can just run away. You're actually going to have to wait the full duration, and that's if that person doesn't have a cleanse. If that person is, for example, a cloaking Nightblade, you're just not going to get the heal at all, because the heal is based off of the damage, whereas this can be applied from range. So it's almost not even worth running Burning Embers anymore. That's how stupid the change is. It's literally almost like not worth running Burning Embers, because you'll get the exact same thing from Structured Entropy. You'll get a heal over time. You get roughly 600 heal every 2 seconds. Again, not including if you're running... I could actually get rid of this ability and run, which most MagDKs don't run, and I would run Fragmented Shield, which would give me an extra 25% healing on top of the healing from heavy armor, on top of the 12% that you get from running volatile armor. Because, in my opinion, there's really no point in running Burning Embers, because you'll get a better heal. You're literally better off having the 100% uptime on the major mending, which will help you manage your stam. It'll give you the ability to actually make a better use out of Mountain's Blessing, because fossilize is only good every 7 seconds. Mountain's Blessing gets procced every 6 if the person has CC immunity, or if the person utilizes a like an immobility pot, or if they're using, someone might actually be using Unstoppable. This becomes useless. You can't CC the person, so you lose access to the passive. You lose access to the passive in Red Mountain, whereas you'll gain it if you end up dropping Burning Embers, which I might do, because it's just totally stupid. The amount of healing that you're going to get from Structured Entropy will equate what you will get from Burning Embers, because people will just be more mobile. The only people that will be unaffected by this, it would be like, for example, if you were fighting a warden, right? Because wardens typically are gonna fight in melee range. I'd say stam warden. I'm talking in terms of being able to maintain the heal. You're actually better off just running structured entropy and then major mending to beef up your heals, especially to beef up your heal from Flame Lash. It's a really dumb change. I disagree with it. Like I said before, the change to Combustion is basically a wash. And in situations where as a MagDK DK you're fighting more than one opponent, it's actually a loss. This ability is typically used by MagDK DKs as well as the previous meta of Stamina DK dot builds. But typically you'd run Fossilize on that build to take advantage of the dual wield passive. There we go. To take advantage of the Ruffian passive, which gives you an additional 15% when they're immobilized and stunned. Since Fossilize does both, you gain a longer access to this passive. If you were running, for example, dual wield, it still works that way. In this patch, one of the major changes, of course, to the whole Stamina DK dot meta was the change to the other morph of Magma Armor, which is Corrosive. Corrosive no longer applies to other dots outside of itself. What it does apply to is it applies to direct damage abilities and channeled effects, for example, like the dual wield channel effect Flurry, which most people don't use. This is more of a PvE skill, although I do see some people utilize this ability in PvP. The reason I find this ability will actually probably be better than Dizzy Swing. The reason being is it's the same length as Dizzy Swing, as you can see here, right? It's still 7 meters. If you're running it on a DK, because it's still considered a melee ability, you'll still gain access to the extra 2% from Elder Dragon. I mean, the 2 meter range, right? It increases the range of your instant melee attacks. Actually, it might not apply. I'm not sure. It might only apply to Dizzy Swing. In any event, it actually doesn't matter, because this ability is a channel. Even when the person moves out of the 7 meter range, it will still attack them. Even if you walk through the person, it will still deal damage. The only time that it doesn't is if you roll dodge, and if it's a 0.6 second ability. So in my opinion, it does equal damage to people who utilize Dizzy Swing. I utilize Dizzy Swing on multiple builds. The only area where it actually works better is that depending upon which morph you utilize, you'll actually gain a heal, as the increasing ticks on this ability are kind of useless. It's primarily utilized for PvP, and the other morph that heals you is the one you would use for PvP. The other morph is used for PvE. Because corrosive only applies to that ability, you might see people utilize that more on stam DKs, but you might as well just use the two-handed ability if you were going to go that route and use onslaught. Now guarantees penetration for the direct attacks rather than resistances, and increases the duration of the bonus. It deals damage to the person as well as an AoE. It's now a 7x5, so you'll probably end up seeing more people utilizing onslaught. Of course, the trade-off is that you get the damage reduction still with magma shell. I forget the other morph. I really don't. Corrosive. Excuse me. You gain the damage reduction, but it's been bugged for years. For years, I utilize this. I check this ability out every single patch. I take a look at it. Is it working 100% of the time? Most of the time, most of the time I would say it's like 50% of the chance that it does work or doesn't. It happens all the time where I'm immediately going to find myself in a 1vx situation. I'll pop it and I'll automatically take no more damage. A lot of times it just fails. I wish they would just change it to major protection, and then just decrease the cost of the ultimate, because a lot of times it fails. A lot of times where most stam DKs don't really notice it is because they utilize it a lot in 1v1s, and they will still situationally block. And typically, if you've dotted someone up and you've pumped their corrosive, they're going to be on the defensive, so you end up not really noticing it. But if you run it on a MagDK, you notice it very often, which I run both morphs. I run both morphs on my stam DK. I run corrosive on my bow build, and then I run typically when I run my heavy armor do wield, I go magma shell, and that's for group play for the shield for everybody on my team. That's why I utilize that. They reduced. They made some changes to Ash Cloud. They reduced the healing over time. I was like, does anybody even use this ability? Let's go ahead and remove that. They reduced the amount of damage that Eruption does from the damage over time, and then they nerfed the healing over time. And it's like, does anybody even use this ability that they're like bothering? It's like, this ability, once they removed the old major evasion, became absolutely useless, at least in terms of PvP. And since MagDKs typically aren't sought after in PvE, it's like not that important to have this ability. Typically where you might see this ability utilized, typically you'll see the damage one used by like MagDKs that run in Zergs, and they literally just spam this ability trying to slow down people because it has this ridiculous 70% slow attached to it. They went and increased the cost. It has a ridiculous cost, as you can see right there, 5,500. It's an abysmal amount of cost, amount of magic to waste for an ability that is absolutely useless. But that's their change. In any event, let's go back to shattering. Another change that came through for MagDK was in, where is it? So Molten Whip. If you run Molten Whip now got a nerf. Instead of stacking for 125, it now only stacks 75 extra weapon and spell damage. So that was a nerf to people who utilize this, of about 150 before major sorcery, 150 spell damage before major sorcery, or 150 weapon damage if you utilized it in PvE. So it's roughly around a 200 or so loss of spell damage for those builds, which of course will affect the tooltip. I don't utilize it because I prefer the heal. Very difficult to 1vx or fight in BGs without the burst heal, because MagDK lacks a lot of healing in comparison to, for example, like Wardens, Templars, even because of the high mitigation that Magic and Nightblades have, Magic DKs, like I typically rely on every little bit of healing that I can. Fiery Breath got a slight increase, went from 2700 to 2800. The skill was already expensive as it is, and so this is again why I say that the Combustion buff that everybody's like, yay, Magic DK finally got a buff, but ZeniMax wiped the buff with the, especially if you run Molten Whip, you're automatically forced to spam embers, or engulfing multiple times, or spam Cauterize. So on this is also why I don't utilize this. Because it's always a magical loss. It's always a magical loss. If you're fighting a Magic DK who's utilizing Flame Lash, who's of equal skill, you're gonna lose. He's going to out heal you, because that's why on this build I don't even need Coag. I don't even need Coagulating Blood. Coagulating Blood is such a shitty heal, especially in comparison to things like Honor the Dead, Breath of Life. It's such a shitty heal for how much it costs. That's the important thing to keep in mind. Don't look at the tooltips. You have to look at the tooltip in comparison to how much the ability costs, and just do the simple math. How much HP are you getting per point of magicka spent? How much damage are you getting per point of magicka spent? It's very important. It's not just looking at a tooltip and saying, oh, this ability has this ridiculous tooltip to it. It's how much damage are you getting for the tooltip. That's what's really important about MagDK. I always say that in conjunction with talking about Ferocious Leap. Ferocious Leap, in my opinion, I don't like the shield. The shield won't save you in PvP. Because it's based off of your health, so it might give you a 10k shield if you're running around 20k, which is literally what two direct damage abilities will take off. About two and a half. If you get hit twice with a direct damage ability and a light attack, the shield just is gone. I wish they would make it do something else. I'm not saying increase the damage, but give it something else. Give you like minor protection for like the next 6 seconds. I would rather have the minor protection for like 10 seconds or something than the shield that literally comes off like that. It typically won't save you, especially if you're fighting multiple opponents. The other thing I don't like about it is the AoE CC. I typically don't like AoE CCs because I see it all the time where people will just leap into a fight and they give everybody on the opposing team CC immunity, and then you can't burst anybody down because you've just given everybody AoE CC. I don't like AoE CCs unless your team is getting so pressured that you have to CC everybody just to give the necessary pressure relief that your teammates need to line of sight and pop a heal, rebuff, etc. So those are basically the changes to Magicka DK. Another change that is an indirect semi-buff, which is the change to off balance. Increase the duration of off balance on all of its player sources from 5 to 7 seconds, and of course that's to improve the window it may be interacted with. So typically what would happen if you're fighting, for example, a medium armor build, the moment you fossilize them, they would automatically CC break and roll dodge, which meant you wasted your flame lash, which is why I always say wait and see if the person roll dodges. If they don't, then flame lash, or if they immediately roll dodge, I would re-gap close to them, and then I would still have access to my power lash so that I don't lose the damage. You won't lose the heal, but you will lose the damage. If the person roll dodges, you won't lose the heal that's attached to it, but of course you will lose the direct damage that is associated with power lash, and then power lash goes on a cooldown. So to maximize the cooldown, at the very least, the buff into the duration of off balance is actually helpful for getting power lashes. The other thing that it actually also does do is that it also increases the window. For example, if you run a DK with like sword and shield, right? Or if you're running a DK with dual wield. Like I run dual wield and I run sword and shield. So, for example, it makes it easier for you to maintain your stamina because you can fossilize, whip, and then the person becomes off balance, and then you can heavy attack them with a melee, a weapon, and it will double the amount of stamina return that you get. So if you do run sword and shield like I do on my light armor build, or if you run dual wield like I do on my heavy armor build, it actually gives you a longer window where you can heavy attack the person. If you're running low on stamina and maybe you're in a situation where you're surrounded by multiple opponents and you find yourself blocking a lot because you're taking a lot of damage, that's a really good way to help maintain your stamina for both blocking and, of course, CC breaking and roll dodging. We'll be looking at some of the other specs. I was really disappointed by this patch. I really don't see many good changes for MagDK. One thing that I was hoping that I wanted to see was a change to inhale. Inhale for the longest has needed a buff. The reason being is because everybody was like, oh, they removed the cap from the amount of players that you can, in essence, utilize draw essence from. It really doesn't matter because the primary purpose of the ability should have been to heal you in situations where you were surrounded by multiple opponents. Again, the MagDK is designed to win the war of attrition, right? So that means you need to be able to heal off of your opponents that you're fighting, which is what you typically do with things like burning embers, where you can burning embers multiple people, and then of course you have access to multiple procs from Power Lash, but that's very expensive. The reason being is because it costs you roughly 8,000 magicka to gain access to the heal that you get from Power Lash. You're like, what are you talking about, right? It's 4,000 damage, it's 4,000 magicka for the fossilize plus the double whip. So it costs you around 8,000 magicka. Even on a light armor build, it's around like 7,600 to gain access to the heal from Power Lash. That's very costly when you're fighting multiple opponents, which is where the situational use of inhale would be made better. Prior to the nerf to structured entropy, where the empower that you used to get from structured entropy actually increased the direct damage of your next ability, that's actually how I used to heal. I never utilized Dragon Blood because in a scenario where you were fighting two opponents, you were better off just utilizing inhale with a structured entropy up front. So you structured entropy and inhale, and the upfront portion of inhale would be buffed by 25%, which of course the heal is based off of how much the damage is done. With the nerf to, or the change to the way empowered works, was a big nerf to the utilization of things like inhale. And of course, the primary reason for it is for the heal, because most people just dodge roll the secondary explosion. What you really need it from is for the upfront inhale, the upfront heal. Now, just as you can see, the tooltip on this ability, let's go to my front bar, it's around 3,000. In no CP, let's just say it's 4,000, right? So if the heal is 4,000 per person, you might think, oh, it's not that bad, right? Again, that's before Battle Spirit, right? So then now that 4,000 heal becomes 2,000. And you're like, well, that's also not that bad, but that's also before mitigation. So if the person has roughly around 25%, if they've got also, for example, either minor protection, major protection, and since it's an AoE ability, if they're utilizing, for example, the medium armor shuffle, it drastically reduces the amount of damage that it does, which subsequently also reduces the amount of healing that you receive. So if you're fighting, for example, 2 medium armor stamina builds utilizing shuffle, you've got a right off the top 25% reduction to the ability because it's an AoE. On top of that, whatever mitigation that they have, typically even in medium armor, you're going to have around 20% or so. Let me actually take a look at it here. I'll look at my medium armor build. I'm looking at medium armor. This is my heavy build. Actually, yeah, look, this is a very good example. This is my medium armored. This is my 5-2. This is my 5-2, 5 heavy, 2 medium hybrid stamp sword. And then you can see right here that the spell mitigation is 27%. Even though I'm only running 18,000, it's 27% mitigation to that ability. Of course, I am running a little bit of pen, but in most situations, it's an additional 20% right off of after the. So it hits for almost half of this, right? It hits for almost half of this amount, and that's the amount that you heal, and that's why it's irrelevant. Also, if the person blocks the ability, if you're fighting, if there's a tank in the way, or if the person just blocks the ability. It also does very minimal damage. This is why I would prefer this ability either to be buffed to increase the amount of healing that you receive and nerf the secondary portion. What I always wanted to see this ability do was be more for crowd control, so that if you were fighting multiple opponents, you didn't have to waste your fossilize to AoE CC people. You could utilize one of the morphs of like deep breath. Deep breath would stun on the first part of the explosion and give you a better heal, and then the other morph would give you access to the minor magic steal. Instead of having the magic of returned based on how many people you hit, most people just move out of the way anyway. And the minor magic steal for like, I don't know, 6 seconds or 10 seconds would actually help Magic DK actually win the war of attrition, especially if you were utilizing a frontline build with a sword and shield. It's just my opinion. Been playing Magic DK for a long time. These are some of the changes I wished long time ago. Ironically, they increased all of the AoE damage over time abilities. What they didn't increase was the damage over time from volatile armor, and they didn't increase the damage over time from shifting standard. I don't know why. These should have been all part of their skill audit, because they made changes to all of the abilities that are damage over times, AoE over times, but they did not touch. They did change engulfing. They didn't change volatile armor, and they did not change shifting standard. That's going to be it for this video, and I'll be coming back with some of the changes to some of the other classes. Probably looking at one of my more favorite classes to play, mainly Magic and Nightblade.